Healthy Living series. It's a good topic. It's one of my favorite topics. Give you a little bit of background on me in terms of the topic. I started growing industrial hemp 4 years ago at our farm. I was one of the first of 9 hemp growers. But my research into cannabis as a medicinal herb, as being an herbalist, goes many years back. To the point where I remember going to conferences and workshops 10, 15 years ago where cannabis was the topic. And at that point, you didn't have the marketplace. We didn't have, some states with legalization of medical marijuana or recreational, because most of the connotation that most people think about when they talk about cannabis is that it's something that's going to get you high. And so that's the stigma. And we'll talk about the history just in a few minutes, but when you start to really understand, the marketplace too, in the onset of the last 4 or 5 years, even with the 2014 Farm Bill, this allowed for cannabis research to happen again from an agricultural perspective in the United States. It had limitations, and so we got in 2015, and it was our first year of growing, shortly right after the first law, when it opened up, in 2014. Won't get into that discussion. That's a whole lecture in and of itself as to what goes on there. I've got some slides of the farm that I will show you. So again, the topic is of great interest. There's a lot of product on the market, a lot of people selling CBD is how the terminology seems to go. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight. The idea here is that my goal for this evening is for you to be able to leave knowing a whole lot more. You don't have to remember the science of it. I'm not going to give you a quiz or anything, so don't worry about that. I'll get a little technical. I'll try to bring it into reality of how it relates to us as humans and people who can use a compound such as cannabis in our daily use, maybe not so much daily, maybe in other ways. The first thing I have to say is that as an herbalist, when I look at plants from a perspective that's maybe a little bit different than a allopathic or just a science mind. We have to look at it from its empirical evidence, and the empirical evidence when you start to research cannabis is quite in-depth. There are a couple of housekeeping things before I jump too far. Bathroom over here, bathrooms over there, and we'll go over the rest of that stuff later. I want to move on with my slides because, whoops, wait a minute, back up one. There we go. This is the typical North American philosophy, I should say, maybe medical philosophy. After a barrage of national advertising, Americans started talking to their kids about drugs. Marijuana is very bad. Now hurry up and take your Ritalin and your Prozac. Doesn't that's the mindset of what we're dealing with. And I want you to think about that as we go through the lecture tonight when I talk about whole plant versus isolated constituents. Prozac, pharmaceuticals are single compounds in most cases, and if they are combined, they would be maybe 1 or 2, but not many more than that, because the chemistries are different. But plant chemistries are a whole nother world, and that's why it's very hard to patent plants, because the chemistries are so diverse. And those chemistries that we're going to talk about tonight are there because the plant produces them for reasons. And so you can try to duplicate it, but one plant beside another plant is going to have some differences, and it's going to have its own individual characteristics, and it's going to have its own proportion of cannabinoids based on what its life cycle is about. So that's what we're going to kind of jump into a little bit here. So what we're going to talk about is a system that was discovered because of the research coming from cannabis. They didn't even discover THC till 1964. They didn't discover CBD until 1992, okay? So, from the science model, in understanding chemistries, we're talking about a system that was discovered because of this research into this plant. What they've discovered is that there is a system in our body called the endocannabinoid system, or what we call for short ECS. Every living entity on the planet has an ECS. Every flower, every plant, every vegetable, humans, animals, insects, anything that's got life probably has cannabinoid receptors. And so we're going to jump into that. So 600 million year old healing system. Pretty wild, pretty old. Been around for eons. Okay, so from a historical perspective, 5,000 years dates back, and a friend of mine sent me a paper out of Psychology Today, written in 1991, and the heading was Medicinal and Spiritual Uses of Cannabis in India, Tibet, and China. I started reading through it. I couldn't read through all 15 pages. But like I said, as I was preparing for the lecture, I mean, I've got so many resources. I kept thinking, well, I can't bring that into this. But 5,000 years ago in China, documented, written uses of the plant cannabis sativa. So that's only 5,000. It probably goes way, way back. It probably was around a long time ago. But, whoops, this thing just keeps jumping, doesn't it? Hang on a sec. Here, let me go back. So there again, first cannabinoid was discovered in 1940. 1964, major psychoactive substance of THC was discovered in Israel. Now, I brought a book with me. I'm going to share a little tidbit of history. This book was a reprint of a book from 1898. This was produced by the Eclectic Physicians. This was written by a man by the name of Findlay Ellingwood. He was a medical doctor. He was an eclectic medical doctor, which there was a group of doctors. I won't get into the whole thing on that, but they were all over the country, and they used plants as their materia medica, as their medicines, instead of the toxins and the poisons that the, quote, regulars were using. So on page 105, cannabis. And you could buy cannabis in this country up until about 1937 in any drugstore. It was considered a patent medicine, I think, at that time. So, but when you start to get into the therapy, it starts to talk about cannabis indica, sedative, narcotic, anodyne, which means it's a mild pain reliever, and is limited degree antispasmodic, meaning works for muscle spasms. It acts upon disturbed functions of the nervous system. 1898, folks. And then you keep on going. It's a remedy for disorders of motility, involuntary irregular muscular movements. It is a remedy to arrest or control pain. It is a remedy for excitability and irritability, urinary irritation, wakefulness, restlessness, and the list goes on down the line. So, the medicinal uses of this plant date way, 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 way back. This is just 1898, over 100 and some years ago. But if you're talking 5,000 years, you're talking about cultural uses. It's been around for a long, long time. So when we talk about researching cannabis, it's kind of an oxymoron, right? When you think about it, it's like, why are we researching something that's already been around for so long? And there's been a ton of research already on it, but we don't always go back. But we're learning new things because in that research of what we're talking about, and I'll show you another slide here. This one is just a slide that kind of, it's hard to read, but on a chronological timeline, it kind of goes way back, you know, a couple hundred, 200-300 years, and comes back through and up into probably, you know, the last 10 years as to some of the research in, you know, a lot of this research came from our own government. So it's things that we paid for with our tax dollars that we now have a little bit more understanding and access to. This is just, again, understanding historical comparison between cannabinoids and opioids. What most people don't realize is the same year that they banned and outlawed cannabis in the United States was the same year that they also allowed pharmacists and medical doctors to very much more freely prescribe opioids. And that was back in 1937. So when we talk about an opioid crisis today, it goes way back, and if you really wanted to dig into the economics of it, you could find that in Afghanistan, poppy fields were owned by pharmaceutical companies in the 1930s and 40s. And a lot of times we were protecting interests from government, we were protecting interests of these big entities that were growing opium and poppies for the trade here. Now, it's kind of an interesting read when you really start to delve into the history. So when you start to look at that, you have to kind of understand that why was it suppressed for 73 years? When in the clinical research of what it was used for, pain, arthralgias, anxieties, restlessness, they didn't always necessarily know exactly about CB receptors and things like that, but I think these things has a mind of its own. Let me make sure it's the right. Yeah, that's fine. And it's a good segue. So let's talk about the ECS, because I don't want to get into all this history. I mean, there's so much that we could do a whole lecture just on history. But the point that I make about the history is that it's a plant that's been here for a long, long time. It has a very interesting bit of use from a medicinal side, a spiritual side, a ritualistic side, and it's even been mentioned in all kinds of texts, even including the Bible. So there are references to the use of this plant being utilized by people over a long cultural history. And so, again, there's a lot of politics today. So let's talk about the ECS. What they discovered was in the human body, there is a regulatory system that is part of everything that is about us, and yet we didn't know anything about it, okay, until the research into discovering of THC, CBD, things of that nature. And over the course of time, they started discovering that there were receptors. So this is what it talks about. The outcome, okay, the outcome is homeostasis, bringing every cell of your body and brain into balance, even when faced with external changes. Come on in. So it's part of a network of communication with our nervous system, which includes our brain and every nerve ending, as well as our immune complex, which ties into every other aspect of what we are in terms of what we do. Now, this is what it regulates. Endocannabinoid system regulates a whole lot of things. Pain, appetite, sensation, inflammation, thermal regulation, ocular pressure, eye ocular pressure, mood, energy, metabolization, muscle control, stress response, motivation, and reward. So it's a lot of regulatory functioning in that respect. So when you think about it, how could this have been unknown for so long when we start to really understand? So science has some good benefit because we've learned to understand some of this complexity of what goes on in our body. So biological nuts and bolts of the ECS, okay? So let's talk about that. You have receptors. What's a receptor? A receptor is, and first off, just so you know, every single cell of the 100 trillion cells in your body all have cannabinoid receptors. Now that's a pretty bold statement. That's big, isn't it? That means that it's been around for a million years probably, that we have evolved to have these receptors as part of a deeper communication network. So they've identified, and I'm going to get into some of these here in a minute, but they've identified CB1, CB2. They have a third one that they've identified. They haven't given it a name. They'll probably call it a CB3 because that makes sense to put it in line. They're understanding what its actions are, but nothing is etched in stone when it comes to ECS. And the one thing I have to say is that everybody's endocannabinoid system is unique to you. Just like the plant, I said, every plant is unique to itself. We are the same way. And the ECS is constantly shifting and changing. And we'll talk about how that works. We'll talk about these endocannabinoids, which means that our body, and I'm going to get into the depth of this, our body manufactures two specific endocannabinoids. There probably are more, but the research has been shown in the two that we're going to talk about here. Enzymes that are part of every living function in the human life form, we know that enzymes are there for reasons, and enzymes are activators, or they tear things apart, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So, what are endocannabinoids? Two most well studied are one that is called AEA, or anandamide, okay? And then there's one called 2AG, and these are chemically coupled proteins that are what will attach to what are these CB receptors. So we make cannabinoids that sit on specific receptors in all parts of our body, okay? So the real key factor is, why do we not produce enough, or are we producing enough? And where does this fall into the continuing of using plants that will influence the endocannabinoid system as a whole regulatory system, okay? CB1 expressed mainly in the brain spinal cord, but that's not the truth. That was 1991. This is 2019. We know more. CB2 expressed throughout the immune, the brain, and through blood and through other carrying systems. So that's that. Okay, anandamide is one of the endocannabinoids that we produce that binds specifically to a CB1 receptor. And we'll get into the receptors in a minute. So just remember CB1, CB2, possibly CB3. The word anandamide is considered, it comes from the Sanskrit word meaning bliss. The researchers who discovered anandamide said that it is the bliss molecule. And it's what helps us to feel, in a lot of ways it helps to, when it receives properly to the receptors, it's part of that balancing act of how we feel. 2-AG, again I've got the chemical name up there, it binds to both a CB1 and a CB2 receptor, but it really has more of an affinity to a CB2 receptor. So as we get into the receptors, you'll understand how we might use compounds such as hemp, okay? And industrial hemp is legal in all 50 states, so we're going to talk about industrial hemp. We're not talking about medical, we're not talking about THC, get high kind of things. We're talking about it from a different little bit of a medical perspective. However, so that gives you a little heads up there. Here's anandamide, pain relief. And remember, sits on a CB1 receptor because CB1 receptors are more neurological. They work in all the nerve system. There again, so our reward system, when we feel good about something, we talk about serotonin as a neurotransmitter. These compounds, these endocannabinoids, interact and work with neurotransmitters in our body. So we have it's so new, even in its research, that we don't even know the full depth of what it really does influence. So we try to keep learning and learning and learning, and every few years you just have to keep shifting your brain to say, well, we know more now and it's different. So the runner's high, you hear about the endorphin levels, people who run all the time and people who exercise a lot, that they have that feel-good feeling because of those endorphin levels. Anandamide is why they feel that way, okay? Mood regulation, we have a lot of people who have things with depression, seasonal affective disorder, varying issues. You can give them quantifying names, PTSD, whatever. And cell regulation. And the cell regulation is really important in what's called differentiation. And when you read articles, which you might have seen some, on the use of cannabis and cancer, cancer is probably one of the most understood in regards to cellular differentiation that has gone awry. It's not working properly. So cell differentiation is something that happens in every cell, healthy or diseased. But when we break it all down to cellular level, anandamide again is one of those that really works. The 2-AG, like I said, preclinical trials show the activation of CB2 receptor results in the reduction of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Now, I'm not going to get real technical. Cytokines are parts of little protein messengers that talk to the immune system. So we know that inflammation is at the heart of all degenerative diseases. If we don't have enough 2-AG, we don't have the regulatory function. So you might have a raging forest fire as opposed to a little campfire. There's nothing wrong with a campfire in inflammation because it's part of the immune regulatory function. Remember I said the 2-AG likes to work with the CB2 receptor, which likes to work with the immune complexes of our body. And when you technically think about the immune system, every single cell is part of our immune, not just the white cells. So huge communication. So when we start to look at bone health, we start to look at, it says even autoimmune, like your autoimmune disorders. That is an immune dysregulation because self is not being recognized. So what we're trying to do is bring about, remember, ECS tries to bring balance. That's the key word we want to look at. So, all right, here's a picture just to give you a graphic. So here is kind of what they've identified. The CB1 found mostly in brain and in nerve, peripheral nerve. CB2 mostly found in the immune. And I did talk about the CB1, CB2. The CB3 is also one that they're researching into the immune as another communicating regulatory compound. This is again just, this was a study done on aging disease. Alzheimer's would have been included in that. And what they did find is that there are these receptors that are going on in our endocannabinoid system do have an influence in a lot of our aging, degenerative type conditions, and again, in how well that we're signaling. This is just, again, just a little quick look. I think there's a picture. CB1 receptor is right here, okay? And this happens to just be a nerve ending. This is a nerve-to-nerve communication. So when you get inflamed nerves, you know, lots of things start to be agitated. And so inflammation, I was at a workshop a couple weeks ago down in Bethesda, Maryland for the American Herbalist Guild, and listened to a talk by a good friend of mine named David Winston. Fascinating individual. We were talking about Alzheimer's disease. And this whole issue of inflammation, brain inflammation, is kind of at the heart of what's going on with these chronic degenerative, you know, Alzheimer's. So when you start to look at these kind of scenarios, we need a better regulatory system. Here's the CB2, moderates acute chronic pain, post-surgical pain, cancer pain, nerve pain. That's what the receptors do. And they also, it's really interesting, it says here, they can activate the opioid system and enhances the effect of mu opioid agonist. Okay, now here's the interesting thing. When you're talking about pain, a lot of times people are prescribed, you know, when they have a chronic, really severe pain, you know, from whatever, you know, the opioids come in. Well, they've discovered that the cannabinoids, the endocannabinoids that we produce, work in and around the mu receptor also. So that when people are actually coming off of opioid withdrawal, using a hemp-based whole plant extract can actually help in their withdrawal, reducing the symptomologies, because it's working not on the receptor, it's working around the receptor. See? So it's all part of a big puzzle that we don't know all the answers to. So it's a real in-depth that we understand what these do. So here again, CB2 receptors are present in bone, as well as the spleen, the liver, and the pancreas. Okay, immune modulating, bone mass enhancement, and brain protection. So it protects the brain. Pain, inflammation control, liver support, healthy stress response. So that's just what the CB1, CB2 receptors are meant to do. Remember, we have two endocannabinoids that we make. Anandamide, 2-AG, that work in these receptors. Keep that in mind. All right. I talked about enzymes earlier. Enzymes tear down things. They're meant to transform. I think, remember in science class, energy is never destroyed, it's just transformed or transmutated. It's just moved around and it just moves in transformation. That's what enzymes do. Okay, anandamide is present for very short periods of time. We haven't even got into how and why and how our body makes endocannabinoids. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the thing is, anandamide only stays around for a short period of time because of an enzyme called fatty acid amine hydrolase. It degrades the anandamide that we make. It comes out, uses it, boom, it's degraded. Comes out, boom, degrades. Constantly being returned, needing to be constantly made. The MAGL, M-A-G-L, you can see this enzyme here. This is a lipase enzyme. That degrades 2-AG. So for every reaction, there's another reaction or a chemical reaction that is instrumental. So when we have an endocannabinoid system that could be either underfunctioning, or we have a lot of enzymatic activity that's degrading it faster than what the demand is, we develop a scenario of what's called endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. I got a slide on that in a minute. Now, just so you can see here, hemp, whole plant hemp extract, dark chocolate, truffles, as well as compounds found in apples, tomatoes, and broccoli can also inhibit the FAA, or what we call the FA enzyme. Think about our diet, think about our food, think about the fact that maybe we are deficient in our dietary, which lends to further deficiency elsewhere. So just keep that thought too, okay? Now, boswellia is from frankincense. It's well known that frankincense or boswellic acid works in the arena of inflammatory processes in the body. It absolutely is a positive molecule that helps to modulate and regulate pro-inflammation. So it down-regulates the raging forest fire that I was talking about earlier. So boswellic acid taken with a hemp extract would be of really good benefit because the hemp is working in both of the anandamide, not so much production, or the 2-AG, it's working in helping it to not tear apart. So we talked about the CB1 receptor. Just so you know, CBD does not sit on the receptor of the CB1. It works around the receptor to enhance the receptor's ability to pull your own endocannabinoid onto it. So it does, and the hemp interrupts the Fa enzyme so that it can't tear it down so quickly, and that allows it to be in your body longer to do the job that it's been made to do. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of involved, isn't it? A lot of depth to this. This is just another slide that says, why should we care about our endocannabinoid system and what should we really do about it to really try to help it out? And so this is just, again, brain health. This is adipose cells, so this is fat, Fats, there's healthy fats, there's unhealthy fats. And the thing is, we have too many of the unhealthy fats. It produces more inflammatory processes. It's a fuel for the inflammation. We see that an awful lot in cancer patients. That their own body is supplying the energy to fuel the inflammatory process. So here we have the gastrointestinal. We know that there are a ton of receptors in the gastrointestinal tract. Many of you have been doing my lectures in the past. We talk about the enteric brain, our gut brain versus our head brain, and there is a direct correlation between that. And the ECS is part of what is drawing that connectivity to it. Okay, so it's kind of fascinating. Of course, liver, you've got liver, pancreas, and other organs. So that's just a slide. These are receptors in every organ system of the human body. Every single organ system has receptors. And that's pretty fascinating when you think about it. So this becomes a whole systemic. This talk should have been not just about hemp, it should have been called the ECS lecture, endocannabinoid system, because if you don't understand this, you don't really get the depth of what hemp-based products can do, cannabis-based products. At whatever level you either are using them in states where it's medical is legal and it's prescribed, I think that's very valid and I think it should be. And again, when you've got some serious medical conditions, and THC is not a bad guy. It's just with the proportion of it as to what it's going to do in the ECS. Okay, and we'll talk about that. So, this is a syndrome that's called endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. Dr. Ethan Russo is very outspoken and has been in the cannabis research field 40 years or longer. He was the guy who helped develop a pharmaceutical product in the UK called Sativex, which is also a patent medicine in Canada and is now available and now in the United States. He was also behind helping to get the first CBD plant approved by the FDA, which is called Epidiolex. And that is a CBD product that was specific to a type of epilepsy, even though when I look at 1898, it mentions it in this book that it would be used for epileptic seizure. And they didn't know about all this chemistry we're talking about. Okay, so he says here that insufficient levels of endocannabinoids will adversely affect digestion, mood, anxiety, sleep, pain, and inflammation. I see a lot of people. I see this every day. Someone is afflicted with maybe not just one of these kind of scenarios, but multiples. This is not uncommon in our modern day world. Also associated with migraines, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, and even some research in MS and Parkinson's. Then you go into other studies showing poor motor coordination, like the Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, diabetic nephropathy, which is kidney disease, chronic kidney disease, and other various disorders, all linking back to a deficiency in our endocannabinoid messaging regulatory function, right? I think you guys are probably getting the picture because it's how the receptors are being. Okay, anti-neoplastic, antipsychotic. THC can have some downsides. There are people who have been ODing on THC candies they got from gummies they get from Colorado or wherever they get them. I mean, the potency is too high. It's too much for the endocannabinoid system to handle. It can be very uncomfortable. Anxiety, usually what happens is you just go to sleep at some point and you wake up okay the next day. Anxiety, neuroprotective. So this just gives you an idea of those these cannabinoids. These are not endocannabinoids. We don't make those. So these are coming from outside the body. Does THC make your ECS high? When a person smokes or ingests marijuana, THC quickly overwhelms the endocannabinoid system because THC sits on a CB1 receptor. It's going to come in, if you smoke it, it goes right into the lung, right into the brain. It's like, bam, you're getting it right away. If you ingest it, it's a much, much slower process. And I know people who, and from a clinical perspective, eating and using either oils or brownies or cookies, whatever, making their own medicines containing THC, and it has a totally different effect. It doesn't come in like a flurry and like a big wave, but you can still overdo it. But I've seen it manage pain very well. And CBD is actually working in a similar arena. Doesn't act like opioid drugs, but it does work on the perception of pain, so that's a little bit different too. CBD, non-psychoactive, doesn't bind to the CB1 receptor, that you don't get high. I'll just be honest with you, I smoked a little of this the other night, I wanted to taste it. It just makes you feel really relaxed. Just kind of sit out there on the porch, I didn't get high, there's nothing to it, it was just a nice little, tasted good. I said, well, geez, you grow it out in the field and you think, well, let's try it. But very, very nice flavor. And it was just a very nice, relaxing period. I can't tell you how long it lasted. It was very low. I just took a little taste of it to see what it would do. Sometimes self-experimenting is okay. So again, these are potential applications: nausea, vomiting, seizure, psychiatric disorder. They're doing a lot of research with PTSD and hemp. And when that says CBD, remember, whole plant. It's not just the CBD by itself. But there are some research going on in isolate in these conditions and in these situations. So I'm going to move into a couple other plants just because I want to talk about some other plants that work in the modulation of the endocannabinoid system and how they work. Clove oil. Have you ever heard the old remedy, clove oil for toothache? Yeah. You know why? Works on a CB2 receptor. CB2 receptor works in pain and inflammation. So, clove. Szechuan pepper works on both receptors. Echinacea, purpurea specifically, binds this, what they call alkylamides. It's that little tongue-tingling effect of what echinacea does. Binds to the CB2 receptor with great affinity, and believe it or not, very interesting, there's a product out called Angiocalm. It comes out of France. No, maybe Germany. That one might come out of Germany. Angiocalm is 20 milligrams of echinacea, purpurea. 20 milligrams. Works in panic attack, anxiety. Very safe, very low dose. Children can use it. And that is because it's, again, binding and working in the arena where anxiety, which would be a CB2, but with some carryover to CB1. Peony is another one that's used a lot. These are plants you're going to be well aware of. Ginger modulates pain. Whoops, come back. Yeah, you know that one. Okay, ginger. Exercise, we talked about exercise. Passion flower. Matter of fact, passion flower has 4 components. There's 4 different cultivars of passion flower, and they work in the endocannabinoid system and then around working with the CB1 receptor. There's a product out that they're using it for autistic and Asperger, and also we're using it in some elderly folks, a compound that's using passion flower and some other nutrition, and it's doing some pretty amazing things in terms of helping people's mood and behavior. They settle down. They don't have so much defiant. The anger issues, things of that nature. Focusing. Curcumin from turmeric. Beautiful in how it melds and works even with a industrial hemp cannabinoid plant extract. The curcuminoids, the boswellia we talked about. Huperzine A is Chinese club moss. A lot of ton of research, actually works better than Aricept, which was one of the first drugs. Right. And it's just getting the right amount to really work. But it definitely works in what's called the acetylcholinesterase pathways, where acetylcholinesterase is what is that frontal, when you need to remember and clarity and dragging, that's acetylcholine, and this helps to keep it more present in your brain. Bacopa is an Ayurvedic herb that is again used in brain health. Ton of clinical on it. Just listen to numerous talks on just Bacopa at the herb conference. Ashwagandha, saffron, and even GABA. Ashwagandha, of course, is Withania somnifera. It's a lot of it out on the market. I want you to know that it is adulterated on the marketplace. You have to make sure that you buy a reputable source or a patented, trademarked raw material Withania. If you're taking a product that says it has ashwagandha, you want to make sure it's the right stuff and it's good quality, because it's adulterated very heavily in the commodity herb market. Okay, saffron, which is pretty pricey, but there are products there. One's called Saffron Lift by Europharma. A lot of good clinical coming out of Europe in the use of saffron and mood disorder. And they're finding it in one study it was as good as Prozac in regards to serotonin and serotonin management in the brain. This all does tie back into our endocannabinoid system though, see? So anyway, now it won't move. Come on, all right. Did the battery die? Here we go. All right. Now, our body, to make its own endocannabinoids of anandamide and 2-AG, it requires an inordinate amount of omega-3 fatty acids. Most people in America are omega-3 fatty acid deficient because we eat too many processed foods. And the thing is, if you want to have better ECS activity or endocannabinoid system regulatory functioning, we need better quality foods, and we need those essential fats. You can get them from numerous sources: avocados, olives, coconut, sesame, almond, and salmon and other types of fish. Alaskan pollock is very rich in essential fats. So those are clean fishes that you can get that are in abundance. They're not over harvesting. And so that might be a real important factor, because when you start to look at many of the things I've studied over the years with different types of degenerative diseases such as cancers, heart disease, arthritis, diabetes, etc., which are all based in inflammation. I didn't put the slide up here, but there's a pathway called the eicosanoid pathway. And when you start to look at inflammation, we have in our body a compound called arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is the starting material for a cascade of compounds that will make what we call prostaglandins. Okay, prostaglandins are PGE1, PGE2, and PGE3. 1 and 3 are anti-inflammatory, but 2 is pro-inflammatory. So if you get the raging forest fire, we know that we have to influence prostaglandin E2. We know that ginger, turmeric, rosemary, bromelain enzyme all influence the enzymatic reactions that produce these prostaglandins. Okay, PGE2 is what we targeted with when they started what you heard about COX-2 inhibiting drugs. Vioxx, Celebrex, they took Vioxx off the market. Celebrex is still on the market. It's a COX-2 enzyme inhibitor, which is part of the cascade that produces pro-inflammatory compounds. They found a long time ago, when we started studying these conditions that were tied to this inflammatory process, we discovered that fish oil at high dose therapeutic levels of EPA to the tune of 1,500 to 3,000 milligrams of EPA balanced with DHA made a huge difference in the inflammatory processes of what's being mediated. And that's only just a little bitty small part of the bubble of inflammation. So here again, tying it back to ECS, if we have more anandamide and 2-AG managing nerve pain and inflammation, it means that we need more essential fatty acids, folks. And with taking more essential fatty acids, there is now even a blood test that will measure your level of essential fats in your blood. Now that's pretty good. So that we can test and find out, are we deficient? I just tell people start eating it. Get as much in as you can. Eat your fishes. You know, trout, West Virginia mountain trout, very rich in EPA. Doesn't have to be salmon. Just saying. I like West Virginia mountain trout from Burgoo. Everybody of mine that brings me some, it's really nice. So anyway, stress reduction techniques, of course, helps the ECS. Learning techniques that are calming to the body, help us to bring about better balance, meditation, deep breathing exercises, things of this nature. Regular exercise, healthy diet, reducing stress. Stress is a huge mediator of all kinds of degenerative processes in the body. Somebody keeps whistling at me. Oh well. That's not necessary now. It's about the milk, though. I bet he's trying to get the milk in the store. It's JP. Tried to drop it off at 7:30, but nobody was there. You want to text him real quick? Sorry about that. we get Snowville Creamery and the door wasn't open, so just text him back. That'd be fine. Okay, cool. All right, potential applications. This is just a couple pictures from one of the companies, but the CBD in the marketplace. Remember we talked about isolates. You got to ask the questions. If you're going to buy a CBD product, because CBD is on a lot of labels, and we don't know if it's isolate or whole plant. And there's terminology that says full spectrum, so you got to really weed through the quagmire. You call the companies on their 800 numbers and you ask them questions. Are you using, American grown hemp? Technically, according to 2014 bill, you couldn't use American hemp. Now you can in 2018 Farm Bill. But anyway, you'll find that a lot of things are in topical. We have more CB1 receptors on our skin surface, okay? So topicals work really great for pain, for deep pain, skin healing, wound healing, things of that nature. So topicals are very good. They will reduce inflammation. There are some vapes, but I've always been suspicious of vapes and the companies who make them because you don't know what the carrier oils are, you don't know how they're going to do. It is a quick delivery system, and in some cases I think it would be okay. I don't think it should be a regular thing. Capsules, liquids are what I prefer personally, liquids, because when we talked about the dosing on endocannabinoid, people come in all the time and say, well, I've got this, how much should I take? And I always say, I don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows. So we got to get down to brass tacks. It says low dose frequently and find your sweet spot for where you start to see the difference. So we usually start 1 to 3 milligrams. And we might only do that once a day because remember, we're trying to bring about balance in a system that's already haywire. You're not going to do it in 10 minutes. You're not going to do it in a day. It might take a week. 2 weeks, a month. Now we can't always wait because somebody says I read an article about pain. Yeah, that's fine. We still got to find our sweet spot. So if we start with a liquid that'll say 1 milligram or 3 milligram or maybe 5 milligram. I have some that are up to 10 milligram and 15 milligram. I think I have a slide. Maybe I might have a slide on this. Yeah, I think it's the next slide. In terms of the maximum dosages that they have discovered, they say at a certain point is where you can, basically you shouldn't go over these levels because they just don't know. But low and slow, and you can start 1 to 3. Maybe you'll do a dose in the morning. Maybe you'll do a dose at night. Let's say somebody's having trouble sleeping and they want to maybe see, well, maybe I'll try a little bit at nighttime to see if it starts to help. You might not notice it the first night. But then you take a dose at night, but then you might still take a dose in the morning because your endocannabinoid system is going to travel with you all day long through the stressors, through everything that we go through. So the CBD or the hemp oil extracts have a way of helping our anandamide and 2-AG stay at a much better level as we start to balance out. One interesting thing I've been hearing in all the lectures is that when you find your sweet spot, it might be 10 milligram twice a day even, or whatever, over time you should be able to reduce down the dose because this has a corrective nature to it. You might not need all that dose in a month or two. So it's okay to pull back a little bit and see if you maintain at the level. If it's for pain, it's a little different because a little bit harder, because pain can be at that scale of 1 to 10. You see the little smiley faces when you're in the emergency room. What's your pain level? Whatever. So these are the things that it's different. I've had some people get great results on a low dose. I've had other people taking the maximum doses that they've pushed it to the level, and all they said was, it makes me sleepy. Maybe that's what they need in part of their reparative process. I don't know. You will not find in the literature much about anything that will be consistent with dosage that says it's absolute. Okay, so keep that in mind. We are guinea pigs, but I'd rather be a guinea pig with something that's going to help my endocannabinoid system than being a guinea pig with glyphosate in my food. Okay, so let's keep that in effect. Okay. It does not induce changes on food, does not induce catalepsy, doesn't, so nothing with heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature. It doesn't affect gastrointestinal transit time, doesn't do any of those things. Chronic use and high doses up to 1,500 milligrams a day have been tolerated. How the heck are you going to get the 1,500 milligrams? You're going to have to eat a cup of this stuff, and you can't afford 1,500 milligrams, so it had to be isolate. Just so you know, because you can't get to those levels. Isolate, I have a company, I can buy isolated CBD, it's still in a base of hemp oil, the whole oil, but they've spiked it up 600 milligrams, over 50,000 milligrams in a 3-ounce container. And you take barely 1/8 of a teaspoon for a dose. Now that economically, wholesale was 600, retail was 1,000, but what would you use it for? That's overkill. I've only had one person wanted to do that, and I helped them out in a crisis situation, and it's just not my normal way of looking at how to use a plant-based compound, what I consider to be rational. Okay, so that's kind of how I look at it. So I think it's very safe to use. It's horses, like you were saying earlier, horses, dogs, cats, they all respond well to cannabinoids. So when we talk about this slide, the big thing is quality control from day one. Is it organic hemp? Was it sprayed with chemicals? The hemp industry is laden with all kinds of chemistry that will end up in you if it's not processed properly. Was it harvested at the right time? Was it dried properly? These are good questions to know. Secondly, how was it extracted? Okay, was it extracted CO2, ethanol, which is, alcohol, water extracted? Water doesn't extract cannabinoids very well. Alcohol will do a pretty good job if it's fresh or dry plant, depending on what you're doing. So those are all important. Because, and this was printed, the law said that you could not sell domestic CBD products or hemp oil products in the United States. That was a 2014 Farm Bill. Now that they've opened that up, we are now seeing a whole lot more American-grown cannabis products on the market, which I like, since I am a hemp grower here. And think about it this way, for 73 years we couldn't grow this stuff, except in research plots. The market in the world has been growing it for 73 years or longer. India, China, chemicals. They've been spraying the heck out of it too. Has to be tested. There's many different analytical testing methods that need to be done, okay? Anytime you want to buy a product, you should be able to say, I would like to see a COA, Certificate of Analysis. A COA should be for every batch that's produced, not for just a one-time, here you go, we tested this, because every batch will be different. When you grow cannabis in a field, you're going to harvest the whole field, you're going to process in a huge batch, and what your end product is going to be for whatever was in that from a homogenized perspective. It's not blended, it's just that every plant's different, like we said, so you're going to get certain percentages in your profile. Third-party testing, that means you send it out. You do your own, but then you send it out so that it gets, conversion is when we have cannabis growing, you have what's called THCA and CBDA. The plant does not grow CBD typically or THC. Those are conversion products from what is called decarboxylation, meaning that the plant goes through aging or with heat. It takes CBDA and converts it to CBD. It takes THCA and converts it to THC. So that's the difference of what they're talking about there. Formulating could be a pure product, it could be a raw product, it could be a decarboxylated product, or it could be an isolate. It could also be formulated with some of these other plants that I showed you that have affinity to our endocannabinoid system, such as turmeric, ginger, boswellia. Some of these other plants are now, passion flower, are being incorporated in certain formulations with some companies. Now this is hemp growing in West Virginia. This was taken at my farm a couple years ago, and I have a great picture of my good friend Charlotte Pritt, who was running for governor that year. She came out and harvested hemp on our harvest day, which was great fun. So many challenges. I wish this is one of the buds. This is what you smelled over here. I wish you could see this better because it doesn't really give you the breakdown. This is a potency profile broken down of the key cannabinoids that are tested for in lab testing. I'm required by federal law and West Virginia Department of Ag and West Virginia law that my crop has to be tested within a period of harvest, okay? That goes to a lab. They do their testing and they send me back a report to make sure that I'm not growing marijuana. That's all they test is THC and THCA, which gives a total THC potential, okay? And that total of THC delta 9 and THCA has to all be under that 0.3 regulatory number, okay? Mine tested out 0.28. 0.28. This was a week before we harvested. The West Virginia test came back 0.111. So I was very low in THC. But in the 2-3 weeks before harvest, it had already jumped to 0.28. So I was right under the limit. And it has stayed under the limit because we dried it, and then we've also sent another sample because we want to make sure that the end finished product isn't decarboxylating and the THC level isn't climbing as it's aging, because age and heat are what cause the molecules to actually produce the compounds. So it's really fascinating when you really get into this thing. And now what we're going to do with ours, we're going to take this flower and we're going to make a lipid extract. We're going to use an oil extraction method that is an age-old herbal technique of making herbal oils. And typically you would make an herbal oil if you're going to make a salve. But we're going to make an herbal oil. We're going to experiment with, we're going to use olive oil, we're going to use almond oil, we're going to use ghee, and we're going to use, what did I say, coconut, ghee, almond, one other one. What was the other one? Olive, yeah. And that's it. And the thing is, the research I've been reading with olive oil extraction shows equivalent or better than the alcohol and the other solvent extractions. So I've got a commercial kitchen, so we're going to go ahead and go in. We're going to do a small batches of each one with the different oils, and then we're going to send those samples off to a lab, and we're going to do a comparative to see if there's a particular oil that actually will extract better, than one or the other. And then I've got a big steam jacketed cooker that I could actually cook down 3 gallons of oil at a time. Small production, but you could eat it, you could cook with it, you could bake with it. there's things we can do with that oil. Make a salve if you needed to. So we're in a big experimental thing, but mine will always be all plant, and we are 100% organic. So I will not spray. I will use natural compounds and other things for bugs and weeds, but it's a weed, It's kind of, I could tell you more about how we grow, but it's been a really interesting challenge. This year is probably going to be our best year so far. I have a book that I'd like to share. It's called The Road to Ananda. I heard this gentleman, I've known Carl Germano for a long time. I've known who he was. He was on my radio show back in the 90s. He was a neuroscientist. And he wrote a book with Dr. Ralph Machulam and Dr. Joe Mercola were involved in the process of the development of this book. It's called The Road to Ananda. And you can get it on Amazon. It's about $15-16. If you're really interested in learning about it more, this is kind of it's an easy guide to understand. It has some technical stuff in it, but it's a great understanding about how we can really influence, not just using CBD, but really affecting our whole endocannabinoid system in a positive way. Grab one of these handouts because it talks about hemp oil for pain, cancer, and more. This is over here on the little thing. This is put out by another company who did their homework. They combine it with curcumin and sometimes with boswellia. Because they're trying to get the most benefit out of that. This isn't about buying product. This is about understanding how to use cannabis in your realm of what you're dealing with as a way to bring about balance. But never ignore the fact that your diet is kind of key, core, critical to everything that we do. Think about your diet. Think about where can I make improvements. Get away from the refined processed foods because this is not what we're designed to eat. We're supposed to eat real food. And if we could get real food now, that's why we also grow vegetables at Cedar Lane Farm, because we're growing real food and we want to sell it to you and we have it manufactured into products. So in the next year, which is our 45th year in business, we're going to hopefully be introducing a food form of line of product that we will have direct involvement with. Some of the ingredients, can't do all of them, but because I can't grow everything and we're a small operation. But that's my goal, is to keep educating consumers like you to do better choices so that we do have healthier lives, have better outlook on what life has to bring, because I don't think we're supposed to be sick and miserable. So, let me see, do I have any more slides? That's it. Hey, what have we on time? Oh, not bad. Before we do that, questions. And that way, we can, and I'll repeat it back for tape, yeah.
You grow exclusively female plants then?
I did this year.
Okay, I kind of wondered.
This is a feminized cultivar.
Yeah.
Yes, no males. And there's some debate about that and everything else too. But when you're looking at growing, first year we grew 5 cultivars. 2 were seed cultivars out of Canada, 3 were out of Italy, and they were Felina, Fedora, and Futura, which are fiber varieties, because fiber varieties had low THC. You could always be compliant with a fiber variety. Well, fiber varieties, when you're looking at CBD content, you're at 3%, 5%. When we do different cultivars, you can get your CBD ratios a little higher. It's still going to be proportionate to all the other, but the THC is definitely kept down. These plants did better than some of the other. The stuff I grew before was like 10, 12 foot tall. Yes, it buds, gets sticky, smells all kinds of stuff, but you're not a processor won't take it because it's too low in percentages. They have to run higher volumes of material through. So I'm going like, okay, so then you're caught in a catch-22. This is actually a smokable. This is meant for the smokable flower market, which is where, unfortunately, that's where the money is. So that's what I grew it for this year, because I needed to get a recoup after 4 years of spending money out of my pocket and no return. I said, okay, I'm just going to experiment with this. So we did. And I got a crop this year that'll basically cover my overhead. So from a business perspective, you have to look at it from all angles. But I'm probably one of there's very few organic growers in the state of West Virginia. People are wanting to spray this stuff because they're looking at the investment. When you pay $1 a plant, $1 a seed is what it cost me. But if you can start doing some math, and out of 500 plants, you have a little bit of an economic gain in the process of learning. And when we did the profile actually was quite balanced. in regards to the CBD and the cannabinoid ratios. So I kind of thought, oh, okay. You know, we have tried growing with raised beds. We've always done cover crop. We've been growing a 1/3 acre to a 1/2 acre. We did, I have sowed seeds. Like I said, we have seed drilled. We have done all different types of planting methods. And this year was the first year that we actually took a post hole digger on the back of a tractor, and we dug 900 pots in the field. We dug, 1.5 feet deep. We pulled that soil out. We mixed our own organic soil blends. We put all kinds of nutrients, from worm castings to organic fertilizers to gypsum to, oh man, what else did we put in there? Manures and that we had been composting, and the plants did really well. The only thing that we had a problem with this year was the plants got pot bound because they put them in those stupid peat pots, the people I bought them from, and they didn't break down. So the roots were constrained, or else my plants would have been this tall instead of this tall. So, but anyway.
Yeah, what kind of predators?
Predators?
Yeah, I mean bugs and stuff. I thought they were
There's a couple bugs. We found there's a worm, the cabbage looper. The green little cabbage worm will eat a little bit. It's like a cutworm. But that's only when it's budding. Only when it gets out to its more full bud. Because we had a few buds where you could see where they had come in and clipped the very tip top, because it turned brown, but everything else down below was fine. Very little of that. June bugs were a little bit, but nothing where there was any danger. They just eat the lower leaves, no big deal. There are molds, and there are some viruses that will go to cannabis if you're not careful, but the biggest problem is people plant it too close. You have to have air. So you need it to have enough air to keep it so that the moisture doesn't lend itself to these kind of organisms to want to live there. And if we needed to, we would not spray chemicals, we would spray neem or tobacco. We grow Hopi tobacco, and we can take the leaves of Hopi tobacco, which have nicotine derivatives, which are antagonistic to a lot of insects that want to come. And neem oil is also very good, and cayenne pepper, and Dr. Bronner's soap. That's what we've used in the past. So that's telling you how we do it. We don't know what the heck we're doing. We're kind of flying by the seat of our pants, and we're going like, well, let's see what happens. Now we can get the chemical testing, because we couldn't get the analysis because we didn't have any labs in West Virginia to do. We had to send it out of the state. You were afraid to send it out of the state because you couldn't cross state lines. They make it so hard for the farmer. Yeah.
How does melatonin, I know they're doing a lot of sort of research on melatonin, is there a natural source of melatonin that affects the serotonin and the levels in the...
Yeah, what is the source of that?
There's a tremendous laboratory research going on in some places that...
I just heard of a plant herbal source that is rich in melatonin, and I cannot... It's one of the nervine herbs. It wasn't skullcap. It might have been passion flower. I think it's passion flower, but I'll dig it out of my notes because I wrote it down. But from a plant perspective, most of the melatonin on the market is synthetically made. Yeah. It's hard to really, I don't know that many plants know how to make melatonin as a substance. But there again, when you talk about essential fatty acids, and you talk about a balanced endocrine system, right? Your body should be able to make whatever it really requires. And I think I would really rather work in that realm. And again, you can use substances like tryptophan. Because, No, valerian actually is not the, no, it doesn't have any melatonin. And it, no, that's okay, it's a good question. The question was about valerian root and melatonin. It's considered a nerve herb, nervine. It works in and around what is called the GABA receptor, but it's not the same as Valium working directly on as an agonist to a GABA receptor, I think is how that would work. But it has an opposite reaction in some people. Some people take valerian, man, it'll wire them out. Especially I've seen some kids, because it used to be in some of the ADD medications, the herbals that were being made. Parents would come back and say, man, that's gonna make my kid wild. And it was the valerian root, because some people it has an opposite reaction with. So it's not all about just a single compound, but good question. Anybody else? Yeah.
So the book that you mentioned would be a good book to have as a reference
Yes.
for what I would need and my daughter would need for our condition.
It will go into the endocannabinoid system regulatory functions in regards to pain, bone health, neurological, but it's not going to give you a specific diagnosis that says if you have X, take Y.
Right.
Okay, so it's going to help you understand systemically from an organ perspective. Okay, so he's got a chapter in here on sleep, endocannabinoid and sleep, endocannabinoid and pain. He doesn't relate it back to cannabis per se, but knowing that cannabis works in that arena, it can have a positive benefit in those arenas.
So a lot of the things that
Yes,
you mentioned
yes,
tonight,
yes,
then
yes.
that would be good.
I'll give you a couple of personal situations of some of the clients and patients I've been working with. Have a gal who had essential tremors. They don't know the cause. Of course, I believe, there to be a whole bunch of issues. However, had been reading about, CBD and wanted to start taking it, so she came to me and we started working with a whole plant extract, very low dose, didn't see much results with what she said. She didn't see much results, even though the people around her saw the results, until she quit taking it. And when she quit taking it, she started shaking more and said, oh, I guess that stuff is doing something. And so then she kept saying, well, maybe it's not enough. So because she would, at different times of the day, things would start to come back, some of her symptomology. So I said, well, that's when you need another dose. So for about 2-3 months, we had to kind of work with dosage levels to find out her sweet spot. But once she felt comfortable enough to use it, she found her own spot. Now she's at a pretty steady, so she can go all day long without having all this, and her sleep is better at night. Now, when you think about nerve system, sleep is that regenerative process that nourishes and repairs the nerve system. So our ECS is really getting repaired at night too. So it can benefit. Now again, we are not allowed to say, take it for this condition, or take it for this, or it's going to cure cancer, or it's going to do all these things. That's not what it's about. It is going to benefit a lot of people in a lot of ways. It is not the panacea for everybody's ailment and everybody's problem, but it's really the endocannabinoid system's role to bring us into harmony and balance. So this is just a tool. It's one of the tools in the toolbox that we can pull out. And I've been experimenting in my personal life, using it off and on at different times, different things. When you travel, you get jet lag. Sometimes you get into something, you start getting all ramped up, and you say, I'll just take a little taste of that. Take 1 milligram, and the next thing you know, 5-10 minutes later, you're just kind of like, yeah, it's all right, whatever. So yeah.
Does it have any interaction with drugs? Like, let's say you have a...
No, I don't think so. I've been reading about that too. In your body, you have, the liver has 4 metabolic pathways that it neutralizes whatever comes in. And the P450 enzyme system is what that's called. And there's all these little nomenclatures for the type of pathway. And there are plants that can definitely influence whether or not the drug is going to get into your body, or if it's going to leave your body too quickly, right? Yeah, so these metabolic pathways, sometimes we don't always understand all about the plant, but from what we're seeing is that it doesn't really seem to affect. But you know what my rule of thumb is? Don't take plant compounds with pharmaceuticals. I think a pharmaceutical is a single-pointed compound. It has a specific delivery system. It's going to hit your liver a certain way, and it has a certain timeline that it needs to be doing what it's doing for whatever the intention is, okay? Plants and supplements and food. Now again, some things they tell you, I think probably, the reason I'm pointing to Sarah is she's a pharmacist. And she also works for us. And so the thing is, she's a wealth of knowledge. And I think that there's a proper understanding that needs to be looked at. And but even sometimes in the science world, they don't really know. And you probably see more drug-to-drug interaction, probably more so, would you not say that, as opposed to a plant drug?
Definitely. The only thing I would say is medications that normally, you want to be careful what you take it with. And the one I always think of is levothyroxine.
Mm-hmm.
Just if you're going to take, whatever you're going to take, space it out.
Mm-hmm.
Either 2 hours before or 3 hours after. That way, whatever you're taking has a chance to get through your system before you take the next.
Yeah, and I think that's just good, wise advice. Again, like sometimes I know cabbage, grapefruit juice, potato can interrupt and enhance some of these liver pathways, and will clear drugs. But did they ever tell you don't eat the potatoes for dinner? No. So everybody wants to harp on the herbs, thinking that the herbs are going to do some crazy thing. That's going to nullify chemotherapy. Bull crap. Sorry, I shouldn't say that on tape, but that's it's not going to nullify it. I have never seen that ever happen in any of the people I've ever worked with who are doing multiple components, but we don't do them at the same time. Very good question. Anybody else? Let's draw for a pracky, for a prize. And thanks for coming out tonight. It's been a great group. Yeah. Sorry, Facebook folks, you can't see it. Can't draw. Okay, the last three numbers are 592. You got it? All right, cool. Here, give them that. There's a bunch of goodies in there. I'll be around here for a little while, so feel free to come pop up, talk to me if you like, and anything we can ever do in terms of resources. Hope this has been educational and informative. Hope it's given you some groundwork to do a little bit more so we can make good decisions about what we're doing. And thanks, everybody.
Well, just a brief question.
Yeah.
So anytime, if we need help, we can talk to
Yeah.
you and figure out what we might need.
I do a consulting service. I have a consulting practice. I only do it 1 day a week right now, but I will make exceptions because I just don't like people to have to suffer through without and waiting weeks and weeks to get to me. But we will definitely do that. And if it's just questions like that, call. If I'm in the building, I will answer you. I will talk to you. All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.